Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Public Health Plus series. We are in season 2 and just about all the way through. We have a few more programs scheduled for later this spring, so stay tuned for those. As Diego said, my name is Michelle James, and I am the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement for the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. Today, we're talking about public health and social entrepreneurship. Our Public Health Plus series was created by the Rollins School of Public Health Alumni Board's Career Development Committee in partnership with our very good friends at Orange Sparkleball to examine the spaces where public health intersects with other disciplines. We aim to discuss that work and broaden our thinking. Throughout this series, we are talking with experts across a variety of industries and exploring how to successfully break down the silos of public health in order to reimagine a more holistic and multidisciplinary approach to public health. We are thrilled today to have Dr. Dungay Kiti and Isabel Swiderski with us to explore how we can use entrepreneurial and innovative methods for global development and to solve social issues. Isabel helps start up ecosystem builders with some social entrepreneurs build successful ventures to enable the impact they have set out to have. She founded her Design for Impact agency, 725, to accelerate the growth of value-driven organizations, whether they operate at a profit or not. Marrying an MBA with an MA in design, Isabel has facilitated co-creation and systems change work, supporting ecosystem builders in 10 different countries, on 4 different continents, and in 3 languages. Quite accomplished. A sessional lecturer at Emily Carr University for more than 10 years now, Isabel is regularly invited to speak and teach on topics of design-led innovation, customer discovery, impact entrepreneurship, and gender diversity at work. Her podcast, if you're looking for a good listen, Design Influence, features conversations on how we might collectively redesign systems that are no longer working to serve society as they should. Dr. Kiti is an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Global Development at Cornell University. She is also an adjunct associate professor at Emory University at the Rollins School of Public Health, although we've let her go to Cornell for a bit, but we anticipate to have her back hopefully very soon. With expertise in communication, education, health, and entrepreneurship, she has more than 30 years of experience in international development. Her most recent work supports the adoption of mobile money technology by women's microcredit groups in Kenya and smallholder farmers in Rwanda and Ethiopia, as well as a partnership that promotes educational opportunities for youth in Kenya. Dr. Kiti has served on the boards of MAP International, the Core Group, and Jericho Road Community Health Center. She holds a PhD in communications from Cornell University, which included a 1-year study in international health with our friends at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. So with that, I'd like to thank both of you for being here today, and I look very forward to an engaging discussion.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you to Isabel and Sophie and the whole group that have been involved in putting this together and having me come and share today. I really look forward to the conversation. I'm always interested in the intersection of different disciplines. I think that's the only way we're going to solve world problems. And so I'm just happy to be here and to be with like-minded people who are interested in some of these topics. I was asked when we were discussing about participating in this webinar, I was asked to address 2 questions, and there were a number of them actually, but I'm going to address the first 2 questions which I was asked, which is, give us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in some of these different disciplines. And then I was also asked to look at what am I currently doing so that you might be aware of what I'm working on. So I'm going to begin a little bit with the background. And this African proverb really describes a lot of my background. Growing up in rural Kenya, my father was a businessman, and my mother mainly did farming. But this quote was pretty commonplace in our homestead. A human becomes a human because of other humans. And I think what I really appreciated about learning this at an early age is that life is about people, it's about relationships. And as you hear me talking about international development or public health and others, you'll hear that as a thread because it was reinforced in the home. Just going on to the next slide real quickly, and I'll come back and share a little bit more about my background in terms of growing up in Kenya. One of the things I was asked to address was what I'm currently doing and what I was doing in Kenya. I just came back last week from Kenya. And since I've been working at Cornell and I have students, I'm still advising through different projects. Part of my time in Kenya was spent working on a project on renewable energy with my one of my students in global development. You can see there, it was difficult because we're dealing with issues around COVID. It was difficult to be able to do this research, but we did. We used Zoom, we used technology, whether it was by phone, computer, you can see the interviews there. She's interviewing individuals in Kenya about renewable energy using Zoom as well. So that's one of the areas I was working in. If we go to the next slide, you heard in the introduction that much of the emphasis of my work is in youth education. I grew up with parents. My father used to tell us, thieves will break into your house and they can take every material thing you own, but there are things they cannot take, and education is one of them. So the emphasis was always do your best in education because it is one of the best ways, especially to address issues around poverty, to create awareness, to create engagement as well. So this is a project we have different partners we're working with in Kenya. Youth education, it has 4 different components. Scholarships, I come from a semi-arid area, Makueni and Machakos area, Eastern Kenya. And one of the things we've seen over and over is that oftentimes young people don't have access to education because maybe their family may not be able to support it or for other reasons. And so one of the initiatives we try to develop, if we're talking about development, again, education is one of the ways to address poverty and other issues, is to help build these students and give them access to education. So on the right-hand side there, you'll see one of the schools. I spend a lot of time visiting schools. Those are some of the 10 girls we work with in one school and their principal there. And then on the right-hand side, we also follow up with these students. It's not just about getting the education. Once they finish, we're trying to build a level of giving back to their community, to their families and others. So on the left there, you see one of the students we had been working with who is now working and able to give back to their community and to their family as well. And we feel this level of scholarship, mentorship, providing, facilitating internships and helping strengthen some of these institutions are some of the ways youth education can make a difference in the country as well. Next slide. While I was there, as most of you are aware, COVID was quite the challenge, and it continues to be the challenge. I spent, like I mentioned, most of the time in schools, but these are just some of the ways I saw COVID being addressed, whether it was something through messages, very basic systems to, encourage hand washing and others, another public health issue. And of course, I absorbed that. Next slide. Water was a challenge. As you can see from this picture, these are all different sites I saw, whether it was people collecting water with oxen, with donkeys, with tractors, with trucks, buying it from an individual who's just pulling the 20-liter containers, as you can see there on the top right. I talked to him. I just said to him, I said, you know, what? He goes, I sell this to restaurants. I sell this to a lot of people who need water. And I asked him, well, where do you get the water? He goes, well, we have different sources where we get the water. And I kept thinking to myself, buying water for a restaurant, you don't know where it's come from. So these are some of the things I was just absorbing and seeing as challenges as I was there on the ground. Next slide. Urbanization, huge issue. Nairobi is getting smaller and smaller. and it just seems to have more and more people every time. And you can see that from the picture on the left-hand side there. I kept thinking we need a One Health program where you look at livestock and people and the environment, because this was a common scene, in Nairobi, just cows, cattle trying to look for food, grass, wherever they could find it. So they're intersecting through traffic, main roads. And so that was very common. Individuals in the middle there, walking from work, just lack of space on the side of the road. And every time I just kept panicking because I kept thinking, what if a car swerved off and hit? And then you can see there in terms of space to hang up clothes and what have you. So urbanization is a challenge. And I think as we look at some of these issues, we have to continue. Diet is changing, especially in the urban areas, as people have some level of income, disposable income. You're starting to see diet change. That has implications in terms of diseases, in terms of health of people as well. And we saw it in commercials all over, advertisements and what have you. Next slide. Climate. Climate is a huge issue. I took these pictures as I drove by a particular part of the country where charcoal was just stacked on the side of the road. That means trees have come down. And there were others, as you can see in the middle slide there, trying to plant trees. But this raises issues. And then firewood being sold. But this raises issues around the intersect of a lot of different disciplines. But it also just reminded me, especially of the intersect of public health and business, social entrepreneurship. People are trying to make a living with charcoal, but at the same time, it's also creating other factors. Okay, the next slide. In the midst of all these challenges, I think you might have heard in the introduction that a lot of my research and work has been in mobile technology. And I think Kenya has really been a good example on really, especially phone to phone exchange, transfer of resources. The M-Pesa program is an excellent one. It's an excellent platform where people can transact money from phone to phone. And that, even during COVID, was a lifesaver. If you go to the next slide, you can see there, most transactions now, many people, I mean, I know I did. I rarely carry cash now in Kenya. I use it all. I use my phone. I transact with my phone because this has become such a easy and convenient way, especially during COVID. There are many places you went to and they'll say, no, we're not taking cash. We just, here's the pay bill, pay us by M-Pesa. So this is just at a gas station, just buying gas. The next slide. So we have this digital ecosystem. And I think as we think of innovation and as we think of unique ways to solve problems, this has probably been one of the best ways in solving a lot of problems in Kenya for social entrepreneurship, for public health, and others. So we're starting to see this as an ecosystem because you can almost do everything. You can pay hospital bills, you can pay education, schools now are providing pay bills. There's so many ways you can engage using this platform. So that's been helpful. If you go to the next slide, there were specific times I would just stop and interact with social entrepreneurs. Social entrepreneurship in Kenya, as in most global South countries, is really the backbone of many of our economies. So when you see somebody who's working so hard in such difficult situations, you just want to hear their understanding, their context, their experience. And so I would stop. And so this is a young man, he sells sugarcane. And as you can see, he has sold enough sugarcane on the side of the road to buy a machine in the middle, now making juice. And this juice is ginger, sugarcane juice, and lime. And my friend Jacinta said to me, oh, you'll love it. It's so refreshing because it's so hot. So I just stopped and I just asked him to walk me through the process as well. Right at the side of the road, the number of cars that were parked waiting for this juice, it just amazed me. The dust was blowing everywhere. We're all standing there waiting for our juice, you know, as this sugar cane was. And then I kept thinking to myself, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. He's got a little thing of water, little container of water where he washes the sands in between or washes the ginger and lime. But at the same time, it has a lot of implications. And all I could imagine is, what would happen if we got a group of business students, public health students, and came and engaged with some of these businesses and helped them find solution. Next slide. Again, I stopped to talk to some of these small businesses, the backbone of our economies. On the left there, you see somebody selling meats, protein, eggs, smokies is like a sausage, hot dog, and samosas, but in the hot sun all day. And this is helping, this helps a lot of people who have maybe just a small amount of resources to buy something just to hold them over till they get home and eat a meal. And then on the right-hand side, outside a bank, I had a wonderful conversation with a young lady who was cutting up fruit. And as she's cutting up fruit, it's in the open, as you can see there on the right-hand side, dust. I mean, it was just, you know, there's insects, and she was so proud of the fact that she's helping Kenyans eat healthy. But then I kept asking her, but do you think, is there another way we should be looking at this picture? Like, is there a better way that we can encourage health? These were conversations I had, very difficult, but if we're gonna be innovative, if we're gonna be grow and link some of these disciplines, we're gonna have to sit and think creatively and find solutions to some of these problems. Next one. Again, out in the open, fish, meat, being sold. I had conversations with all of them. All of these pictures were approved for me to be able to share. I told them I teach and I'm looking at the intersection of business and they said it's difficult. We have to do this. Very popular places, very popular foods, but at the same time, some of the risks that go with this, especially during a pandemic when there's lack of water and others. And in the middle there, I had this conversation with a woman who was doing somebody at that spa, doing somebody's feet. And she kept saying, I have to continue working despite COVID. And how do I do it safely were some of the questions. Next slide. Boda is very popular in Kenya. Motorcycles have become very popular as a mode of transportation, whether it's transporting people, as you can see there on the left, or transporting as part of the supply chain. And I kept seeing these motorcycles with these bottles, usually in the evenings. And I kept asking, you know, where are they going? Somebody said, oh, they're probably taking these to the estates because somebody's probably packaging water or packaging juice at home. And so there were some of these conversations, whether that's where they were being taken, I'm not sure. But the fact that the person driving it could not see anything around him just made me fearful. It was a public health issue as well. The lack of helmets. This is part of the challenge that we have. These are public health issues that I just kept seeing and repeated and saying, how do we find innovative ways and to link these. People have to earn an income. They have to support their families. They have to address issues around poverty and others. And how do we engage in that? Next slide. So I kept thinking to myself, I thought of my colleague actually who we worked together here in Atlanta, Ravi, and he used to tell us and emphasize to us, development is a process of reducing vulnerabilities and increasing and strengthening capabilities or capacity. And I kept asking myself, how do we do that in the situations that that I was highlighting? And it has challenged me because I've come back thinking about these. I keep thinking these are the backbones of our economies, but yet what can we do in terms of processes, procedures, policies that help support some of these small SMEs? In most of our countries, they are the largest employer of individuals. They really do hold up much of our economy. Most businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises like these ones I have just shown. And how do we take different disciplines and help build and strengthen what they are trying to do? So with that, I just wanted to introduce a little bit and put more in context in terms of, as we talk about these topics, this is the context we're looking at. So,
thank you for sharing that, Dr. Kiti. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground now. So you've been in this space for 30 years. What is the thread that runs through your work? How do you choose the projects that you work on? Because obviously you engage in research, but the projects that you're actively working on, what's the thread that runs through for you?
That's an excellent question. I think really, if I can say, it's looking at, because I'm in international development, I'm constantly looking at what is really doable, what is sustainable, what really will make a difference on the ground and make the most impact. So oftentimes as I'm looking at programs, whether I'm in academia, whether I'm working with an international development organization, these are often some of the questions we're asking. What really makes a difference on the ground? The education is definitely a theme. Like I said, I grew up with that education, the importance of education. But we're also seeing, as we follow up with these young people, and especially now as they're working, we're seeing how they're turning back and saying, let me educate my younger sister, my younger brother, helping community. That for me is very sustainable in helping families come out of poverty and address some of these issues as well. But now, because my areas are in mainly public health and development, I'm starting to ask these bigger questions because of the pandemic. I mean, COVID has really made us start asking some of the broader questions, especially across disciplines. How do we look at supporting social entrepreneurs in the context we're in, with the challenges they face, limited resources, limited spaces, some of these broader challenges of infrastructure, whether it's water, access to water, or some of the basic resources they need. So the threads are often driven by what the need is. Sometimes the difficulty in development is that the need is often defined externally rather than internally. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I think that's part of the challenge, is really looking at, and that was part of my conversation with these social entrepreneurs, was what really are the challenges you're facing and how do we help address those? And that was part of what I was asking, is really hearing from them firsthand what the issues are.
Well, and that's part of the challenge and the opportunity in this moment, isn't it? Is bringing partners who maybe have done international development a certain way and now are maybe wanting to engage with communities in a different way. Can you tell us a little bit about that approach of co-creation and engaging with folks on the ground? What have you seen work in the current context of the emergence, and I would say the acceleration of impact entrepreneurship now, and kind of the natural tension that's occurring with more traditional economic development?
Yeah, Let me begin with where I somewhat ended the last conversation, bottom up. Partnerships have to be built based on the need and the felt need, oftentimes. It's not us determining what is the need, often those of us who are in development. It's walking alongside. If we look at partnership as walking alongside people, you're walking alongside them, asking them what their needs, what their issues are. I think the other thing we have to look at is how do we create creative and innovative networks and partnerships. For a long time, development, there's sometimes a bias who you can work with. And I would like to challenge all of us to say, sometimes the most unique partnerships are those who you never expected you'd ever work with. And I think that's another lesson learned, is that we have to look at, in each context, it's going to vary context to context. In each context, rather than taking a cookie cutter idea, collect our information, figure out who on the ground would really make a difference. Who do we need to partner with? And then find ways to engage with that group. So sometimes there were times I've seen in my, years working in international development where there were groups we never thought we would work with. But when we went into a community and they said, oh, that group has really been helping us in this area. Because what you're really trying to do in partnership is to create linkages that maximize the impact. Whether it's like-minded people, even if they think differently than you, sometimes we have to sacrifice our interests because of communities, because of the context and the people we're working for. And that's not always easy. And so I think—
And to be fair, collaboration in practice is a lot more difficult than collaboration in theory.
Exactly.
So and to that point, and sorry to jump in here, but what have you seen that's successful in sort of helping to accelerate that trust that's necessary to be able to make those decisions that you just mentioned, where you said, well, maybe we'll compromise on our own interests here to move the work forward? What have you seen that works well?
I think openness, really being sure we're being open as we look at partnerships, developing partnerships, being open, not having hidden agendas. I think that's partly what has become difficult in partnerships. Listening, and I repeat, listening to community or the people we're working to serve. What is to their best interest? How do you complement one another? What is the agreement? What are the expectations? These are all things I know we've had to deal with as we have looked at working in different areas. It's not easy, like you said. It's easy theoretically to talk about partnerships rather than doing it. But I think time, trust, building that trust, taking the time to build that trust, being open, being honest, recognizing that you're all for the common good, hopefully. So you've got to find ways to engage that, knowing what the expectations of each are. The other thing I think over the years I've seen, and I think we have to take advantage of, is the fact that partnerships take resources. And I think there's a basic assumption that sometimes you just come together, you just talk, you just try to partner. It takes resources to build partnership. You may need somebody who's responsible for that partnership or that network. And that may require some resources. Coming together oftentimes requires resources. Understanding what are the resources that are needed to build it. So that's been, for me, a big lesson learned, is that oftentimes we think partnerships are just about talking or doing, but oftentimes they require resources. And so you have to build it into your planning and budget.
And so to that point, and the point of speaking and doing, you straddle a lot of spaces, academic, economic development. How do you bridge the differences in language to make those partnerships possible?
That's an excellent question, and it's a difficult one. I think language
Sorry.
is about culture. It's tied to culture. It's part of culture, and this is where I would also highlight, since we have a lot of scholars, we have a lot of people who work in there. I think we have to continue to push linguistics, language, as a key part of intercultural engagement. I'm not sure we always do. I think that is something we have to constantly challenge ourselves. But again, I want to go back to a word I used earlier, listening, understanding the context before even beginning the work in a particular place, finding out where the assumptions are. We make so many assumptions in development because we often have our paradigms in our minds. And part of those, really, that openness and that trust, part of listening is what language is being used, what language is being used to communicate. And that's just looking at languages. I think part of language is also perceptions, expectations, but being open about that. What do you mean when we talk about we're working on this project to reduce poverty? What does poverty look like to you? Let's use poverty, for example. We throw that word around a lot, but it means so many things to so many people. The number of times I've had conversations, especially in the Global South, with people who say, you know, you guys come from outside and think we're poor. We don't see ourselves as poor. We're rich because we have, we have community, we have faith, there's so many assets we often ignore because we're not listening, or we're not observing, we're not watching. And those are all different ways of communicating. Those are different languages that people are using to communicate to us. And you have to take that holistically and integrate it into your approach. And that's, for me, that's part of language. It's part of listening. What is it that they're communicating? How are they communicating it, and their behavior? So I think understanding, it's the same as conversation I had with some of the social entrepreneurs I just showed. We had this debate about capacity building versus capacity strengthening. I said to them, you have so much to teach me. But oftentimes when I come as a development expert, I argue, oh, I'm going to go build their capacity. Well, guess what? Development is about mutual learning. They're building my capacity too. They're teaching me, they're educating me. And sometimes I think we who are working, especially from the global north, from external, whether even it's external within countries, we have to recognize that unless we understand that level of humility and that mutual engagement, we're often communicating very different things.
What do you think the role of higher education is in supporting the development of leaders and practitioners that can be better at identifying their own biases and being better at listening and taking that approach of co-creation and of learning from each other?
Yeah, that's a heavy one too as well. But it's an excellent question. We have to grapple with these issues. We really do, because if we're going to talk about sustainable development and impactful development, whether we're talking about social entrepreneurship, public health, whatever we're talking about, we do have to grapple with this. I think how we build programs and what we integrate into programs and how we prepare students. The number of conversations I've had, even with students and from different universities, really, in different contexts is, oh, I just feel like I can pick up and go help. I just want to go help and I want to make a difference. That's great. But how do we take that energy and really build a curriculum that can really help you make a long-term difference? Because the help is not just me being helped, as somebody who's on the receiving side of, assistance. It's learning, you're learning too. The number of times I've traveled around the world with students. I was part of a business program that we took 4 to 5 students to work with companies around the world. And I took students to Ghana, to Rwanda, different Kenya, different countries. Almost always, the students will always say, oh, you know what? I really learned a lot. I think I learned more than I actually gave. And I love that response, because that's exactly what we're trying to get at when we talk about building a curriculum that really helps students build leaders who are really going to make an impact on the ground. Because it's that recognition that you can learn from anybody. We learn from each other. It doesn't matter. And I tell students this, even when you're in the car with the driver, if whoever's driving you around, they have knowledge of that country, talk to them. Ask them questions, engage them. And so I think when we recognize in higher ed that we're not the only ones who hold the knowledge to many of these things, that knowledge needs to be exchanged, and that we have to learn from one another. I think that begins to make a difference and begins this realizing, helping students especially realize that the process is about mutual engagement. It's not about one having all the information and the other one not. No, the number of things, those businesses I just showed you, the number of things those entrepreneurs said to me, I say, oh my word, I never even thought of that from that perspective. And we had this conversation because some of them I was with for a long time. I mean, I just sat there, of course, eating meat or drinking juice, sugarcane juice, but having these conversations. And so I think that is one of the ways to respond to your question, one of the ways that we have to find a way and to build preparation, programs for preparation that really address some of these issues around humility, engagement, respect, mutual learning. These are all topics that have to be central to our process of engaging and modeling.
Well, and you're also a proponent of cross-disciplinary teams. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I'd say that would go as a very strong partnership with having those, what people call soft skills, with that ability to collaborate with people from different disciplines. How have you approached that?
I think a beginning point, to be honest with you, Isabel, is just the recognition that there's not a single problem that I can think of that I've seen on really almost anywhere that can be addressed by one discipline. There isn't. It really isn't. I showed the picture of these entrepreneurs who are often working on the side of the road, what have you. Well, start asking questions. Well, where are the resources? That's a health issue. I might define it as a health issue, but maybe it's an income issue. Maybe it's a policy issue. Maybe there's so many factors that we've got to look at really any problem. And so I think that's a beginning point. Sometimes I think what happens is, especially if we address issues from our own discipline, we just, I termed it public health because that's my area, but for a lot of people there, they may not even see it as a public health issue. In fact, some of those people aren't seeing it as a public health issue. The lady with the fish said to me, I said to her, well, isn't this, this exposure? She goes, oh no, before people take the fish, we put it in the deep oil again, in the hot oil again. Therefore, it's not a public health issue. So, you start looking at the way people are arguing and the way they perceive the issue. And oftentimes, it's going to require a number of disciplines for her to see, or for anybody to see how to address a problem. So number one, I think recognizing that there's not a single problem that can be addressed by a single discipline. And then number two is just seeing the interconnectedness. We do a lot of mapping in some of the classes I teach. Just map a problem, just start off with one thing and just make a linkage to all the things that might be an issue around a problem, you start realizing, oh my goodness, this is about 5, 6, 7 different fields. We need somebody in engineering to look at this. Maybe the water problem is an engineering problem. Maybe this problem is, and you start realizing you need all these different fields, different disciplines to address a problem. Secondly, we sharpen one another. We learn from one another. The number of students who say, the last trip I took to Kenya with students before COVID, I had an engineer on the team. He kept saying, I just never thought I would learn so much from students from other disciplines. And so it helps sharpen each other because you start looking at your own discipline from a different angle, which makes and enriches the process of development as well. So.
Absolutely. You started us off talking about humans, and I think a lot of our conversation has actually revolved around speaking with each other, understanding each other, learning from each other. What gives you hope in the work that you do?
What gives me hope? Young people give me a lot of hope. That's my true response, because they really do. And I say that even just starting from my own, looking at my nephews and nieces, their ability to think creative, their ability to think more inclusively in many ways, to think more broadly and integrating different disciplines, and taking risks. I think guided young people can really, they really give me hope. And I say that as somebody who just spent, a couple of months visiting maybe almost 15 different schools, interacting with young people and alumni, those who have finished and are working. We went to their workplaces to see how they're doing. And that gave me a lot of hope in that you can see when they're mentored, when they're guided, their heart is often there to see. And I think what I notice is they have eliminated some of the biases we tend to have that have traditionally been there. And so that gave me a lot of hope. But there's also hope in that we're talking about these things. We're platforms like this webinar, talking about some of these issues. We're getting them out. We're interacting about them, because sometimes people feel hopeless because they feel like they're by themselves, or they don't have anyone to partner with, or they don't have anyone to engage with. And I think that engagement, that interaction to help us think creatively and innovatively to address some of the issues that are really challenging our world today, I think that's a lot of hope.
That is, I will have one more question for you, but I do see that there are some questions in the chat, and I don't want Sophie to tell me that I didn't do what I was supposed to do. So, oh, there we go. Perfect timing, Sophie, thank you. We have a question over here from Jorge. Has the Kenya CHV program been involved in needs assessment or responsive communities for economic development as the social determinant of health?
Which program? I didn't hear exactly.
The Kenya CHV program. Jorge, do you want to give us some
community health-based program? Is that what is CHB?
I don't know. There's a lot of acronyms. Jorge, if you're here, do you want to specify what you're?
Definitely, yes. Thank you. Community health volunteers, and this is something that I was on a call similar to this one a few weeks ago, and they mentioned how they were able to build up a registry of community health volunteers, and that's where that's the context for the question.
Excellent. Thank you for your question. Are you calling in from Brazil?
From Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
Yes,
Nice.
And to that further context, I'm working right now on a grant, a CDC grant, in which through community health workers, we mean to formalize the workforce in Puerto Rico, as well as help with different social determinants of health, chronic disease, and COVID-19 response. all at the same time. And part of what I want to do is what's already been done in Kenya, which is that CHW network to
Yes.
be established. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent question. Let me tell you, I think we need to take you to Kenya to discuss this issue, because the number of times I have said for years, we built CHW networks in communities in other places, but we're really not using them that effectively now. I think there's been an evolution of change in terms of health. As we institutionalize health, I think the CHW model has been a lot more removed from it, just because we have a lot more clinics now, a lot more hospitals in the region. So the model, CHW model, worked effectively, especially when we often didn't have access to those institutional resources. But I have in so many forums in Kenya said, we need to revisit the CHW models, especially around a pandemic like COVID. You know, people who can go back into the community. It's there, but it's not as strong as it used to be. And now what I realize is there's a lot more institutional based care that people are able to access because we have district hospitals, we have rural clinics now. Those hospitals have developed clinics in some of the areas, which is a good thing. But I'm not sure when pandemics like this one come, we still don't need that network to go and help educate and train and make sure people have the resources and access. I think the other challenge in general for CHW networks has been the incentives. We had part of my master's program years ago was actually looking at community health programs in Kenya. And one of the challenges was the incentive. And they told us that. They said, you know, we want to volunteer, but oftentimes we also need some level of resources to be able to continue the work. And so there's that tension between incentives, especially financial incentives, versus really the service and the time people have for the service. So I think this has been part of the conversation in the Kenyan context. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think I will save your contact to reach out to you, because in Puerto Rico, there was a similar transition in terms of developing infrastructure, moving or reallocating funds to those structures, and now having to catch up to develop that workforce that was already there previously, but has been somewhat removed. And
yes.
in our experience with Hurricane Maria, it was the community health workers and community leaders who first were able to respond, even before federally qualified health centers, and were actually that key liaison between communities and services. So that's all of this that you're mentioning is extremely relevant for the work we're doing. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Let me add one more thing real quickly, and I know there are probably other questions, Jorge, for that. For my master's, I actually looked at one particular region in Eastern Kenya. And the reason why was when we went to evaluate the community health programs, I saw a trend. The leadership, there was a gender imbalance. The community health workers were mostly women, very few men. And so I was curious to find out why this gender imbalance, because if we're talking about community health and volunteer, and then you think of everything that women have to do in some of these communities. So that was an interesting discovery in terms of that. And I think that may also play into it, the gender, the fact that many times it left the work up to, in many communities, I'm not saying all, in many communities, to the women. That could also play into the workload issue. And I heard it over and over. We heard it over and over when we did the assessment. So there's a gender issue as well.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Dr. Kiti? Do we have time for one more? Oh.
Isabel, I know you had said you had another one, but I think you hadn't had time to ask. So in the last couple minutes,
Sure. I mean,
feel free.
I have so many. Well,
Perfect.
I think, Dr. Kiti, one of the questions that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you at the beginning is, how do you define social entrepreneurship?
How do I define social entrepreneurship?
Because that's been one of the hindrances, isn't it? Is that nobody can agree on how to define it. And so it prevents from moving the work forward because people are like, well, that's not a social enterprise, and carry on.
Well, and I think I don't think there's still no agreement on definitions. You
No,
find it
there isn't.
defined very differently in different contexts. But I think for me, social enterprise tends to have, it's often businesses that have been started to solve a problem, especially often very community-based type, and oftentimes it started because either your family or people within your network, smaller network, realize that's a problem. You're filling a particular issue or addressing a particular issue. One of the things we've tried to do as we work with SMEs or small and medium sized enterprises is help them differentiate, try to, as much as possible, help them differentiate when balancing between the economic use of a business, the profit, versus the social. Because sometimes what happens is they get drowned out by the social, because they're so, many of these businesses are in community-based, communal type of cultures. And so it's very easy to just do business for the sake of addressing a social issue, but you never really do business as a business. So how do you balance those? So this is a conversation we often have frequently with SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, is how do you balance those two? And how do you ensure that you're not just doing business as just as a social, a process of socializing. You are addressing a problem, but at the same time, you're doing some kind of economic development through the profit and what have you, and you're growing. I mean, that's the purpose of the business. So it's how do you balance those two?
I just read a survey of young change makers, and 85% of those, it was a small survey, but it was about 800 young people, specifically in Europe, and 85% of them said that they were very motivated to encourage other people in their same age group to become change makers. You have high hope in young people, you teach. What is your call to action to them in this moment in time?
I think to remain open, to engage globally. I really support global education. I mean, understanding the world as is, because I think that's where the interconnections begin. The minute I see that my behavior can be impacting somebody in Sri Lanka or somebody in, Ecuador, then I start seeing things very different. And I think be open, to think globally, to really put volunteerism and service into their, into their educational process, into their learning process, because I think that's a great way for us to learn. And just to engage, to stay engaged. I mean, just being engaged, reading, understanding, talking to people, being inclusive. These are all different ways that we had these conversations with the youth we were visiting. How do you ensure you're thinking out of the box, and thinking out of the box in a positive way and creatively, rather than but think globally, even if you're acting locally, understand what's going on around the world. If COVID hasn't taught us anything, it's taught us that we're all interconnected, and one impacts the other, and we all have impact on each other. So those are maybe some of the few things I would encourage young people.
What an amazing way to end a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time, Dr. Kiti. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. And I know you have closing words. Thank you, Dr. Kiki.
Thank you.